before about going backwards instead of forwards, that he would go back to the 50s to talk about Russia as our worst geopolitical foe. And on, the bluster that we hear from Governor Romney, whether it's criticizing our Iraq policy and promising that he would leave troops on the ground in Iraq with no promise of ending the war, or the number of different proposals he put out on Afghanistan, again, with no promise to end the war, or, stating that he wouldn't move heaven and earth to get bin Laden. I think that the governor is picking the wrong fight in this election if he's going to take on Barack Obama on foreign policy.
Look, the killing of bin Laden was a great achievement for America. Governor Romney credited the president for that. He also gave credit to the intelligence agencies that were involved in searching him out, and of course to the members of the military who carried out that mission. But the measure of America's foreign policy is how strong is our influence in the world. And our influence is dependent on two things: our economic strength and on our military strength. Now, we know how weak this economy is. We've added unprecedented levels of new debt. And in terms of the military, we are on a path under this president to cut $1 trillion over the next 10 years. It is a combination of this weak economy and a hollowed-out military that is emboldening our adversaries and weakening our influence around the world.
Doesn't defense have to be a part of reducing the debt?
$1 trillion over the next 10 years, that's a level of reduction that the Secretary of Defense called devastating. That needs to be changed. But this president hasn't taken any action at all to stop this sequestration process from happening.
Well, it goes to Syria, first of all, which is the fact, do we want to become involved as we're withdrawing from 2 wars in the Middle East, that region, do we want to get involved in a third? That is, do we want to get involved in a civil war in a sectarian tribal society? Governor Romney says we should be taking more assertive action to change the Assad regime. I don't know what that means. The question is, what does it mean?
I'll tell you what it means. Because he's spelled it out. There are 2 things that we can say about the opposition in Syria. They're very brave, and they're not going away. What they need is the capacity to wage a fair fight. So what Governor Romney would do is encourage the United States to work with our partners to identify, organize, and arm the opposition. I mean, these are very brave people, and they're going up against vastly superior forces in Assad's army. And they've suffered 10,000 losses, just slaughtered by the government.
But a few decades ago, we armed the opposition to the Russians. We armed the Taliban in Afghanistan, and
well, of course you have to be careful in selecting your partners within the opposition. But let's step back for a moment, because for the last year and a half, this president has not engaged in organizing moderate forces within that opposition. So to the extent that there's a vacuum that's being filled by bad actors, that is the president's fault.
But once we start, it's hard to stop. We entered the war, the civil war in Libya, to prevent, in Benghazi, one city, a humanitarian disaster. A no-fly zone soon became searching for targets on the ground. We didn't have mission creep, we had mission gallop. And 8 months later, we were implicated in changing the regime. How do you stop once you engage?
Well, the governor's not talking about intervention.
No one.
What he's talking about is arming the opposition so that there's a level playing field.
The chair of the House Intelligence Committee and the ranking member believe that that is the wrong strategy, because we simply don't know who they are and exactly what they will do with those weapons. Look, Mr. Assad has turned out to be just like his daddy, a brutal dictator. Kofi Annan has it absolutely right. The Arab League and others in that region have to play a much larger role in trying to end the violence and getting Assad to leave. So the question is not, if he should leave, it's when he should.
Well, and the other question is, I think George will point up a lot of the questions about the governor's plan, but what more can President Obama do right now to help push Assad out?
Well, we're doing everything possible to isolate that regime, whether it's leading the world to expel Syrian diplomats from our allied countries, tough sanctions on Syria, everything we can to isolate and move the UN towards taking action. And, the president is committed to toppling the regime in Syria, but we have to do it in a responsible way that protects our own interests. And, as Donna said, the House Intelligence Committee, which actually knows what it's talking about here, disagrees with Governor Romney about arming the opposition. If you arm the opposition, then you are responsible for wherever those arms end up, and I don't think we know that yet.
Let's take a quick break right now. We'll be back with the roundtable in just 60 seconds. Michael Bloomberg and John Edwards. He avoids jail. What's next?
I don't think God's through with me. I really believe He thinks there's still some good things I can do.
Every time a local business opens its doors, or creates another laptop bag, or hires another employee, it's not just good for business. It's good for the entire community. At Bank of America, we know the impact that local businesses have on communities. That's why we extended $6.4 billion in new credit to small businesses across the country last year. Because the more we help them, the more we help make opportunity possible.
Here's to the philosophy that if it feels good, do it. If it's a reward for achieving one of your goals today, or if it's ensuring the performance of the engine you need for your livelihood, feel the good in every twist of your journey. And it all begins at your local Citgo with just what everybody needs. And with each visit, you help us fuel good causes in our neighborhoods by giving back. Your locally owned Citgo says, if it feels good, do it.
Thank you so much for inviting our rowdy friends to my hanging. When the British burned the White House, Dolly Madison famously saved this portrait of the first George W. Now, Michelle, if anything happens, there's your man. I am also pleased, Mr. President, that when you are wandering these halls as you wrestle with tough decisions, you'll now be able to gaze at this portrait and ask, what would George do?
A relaxed and funny George W. Bush at the White House this week as his portrait was unveiled. We're back with a round table, and I guess quite different scene from Greensboro, North Carolina, where John Edwards left the courtroom, not guilty on one charge, hung jury on 5 others of campaign fraud. And when he came out for the first time, he mentioned his daughter, Quinn, who he had with Riel Hunter.
Finally, my precious Quinn. Who I love more than any of you could ever imagine. And I am so close to and so grateful for. So grateful for Quinn.
Down in Brazil, the first time he had mentioned her in public, he does avoid any jail time, almost certain that the Justice Department is not going to bring this case again. I talked to several of the jurors on Friday. They didn't even think it was a particularly close case. But can he really come back? As you know, he had that phrase saying, God is not finished with me yet, a little Jesse Jackson there.
Well, if he's listening to God, I hope it humbles him and that he spends as much time as possible being a good dad to all of his kids and a good man. John Edwards was caught up in a series of lies that he could never unravel, and lies that perhaps destroyed his family, but it clearly destroyed his public reputation. I don't know if there's a road to redemption. I hope so, because I believe in redemption. But I think for now, John Edwards would be wise just to mellow, chill, and just be with his family.
And George, well, maybe the same advice for the Justice Department's public integrity section. Some of the jurors I spoke to thought the case shouldn't have even been brought, and they've had a pretty bad run.
They have, but I'm glad they did bring this to trial, because I think it served 2 public functions. The first is the jury, by acquitting him and by hanging on other issues, said essentially that the rule of law presupposes that the law will give the citizen due notice of what behavior is mandatory and what is prescribed. And they said in this case, who knows? And that's the second point. This case dramatized how baroque and murky the laws encrusting our political activities have now become. It's not unusual, as you know, for a campaign to spend 15% of its money on lawyers just to try and decipher
How careful
this.
are you two now in anything dealing with, you know, the crossover between campaign? Well, you're both in the campaigns right now. How do you think about that, the idea that at some point lawyers or somebody might be looking?
Well, I mean, I agree with George that our campaign finance laws are arcane and complicated, and you need to be careful. We obviously have lawyers working on the campaign to ensure that we're doing everything by the book. So I can't speak for Eric if he's talking to lawyers as well.
Well, in terms of campaign finance,